Our second speaker is an assistant professor in philosophy at UP Baguio, where she teaches courses in ethics and the history of philosophy and the social sciences. Her research focuses on emotions, ethics, and social justice. Her most recent work, Emotions and Filipino Resilience, is forthcoming in Routledge and is a part of a collection of Filipino philosophers. She was also recently awarded the UP Faculty Grant Award in Philosophy for outstanding teaching and public service in UP Baguio, presenting Martha Nussbaum on what women are actually able to do and to be. Everyone, let us welcome Assistant Professor Olivia Mendoza.
Good afternoon, everyone. Alright, so the title of my sharing is Martha Nussbaum on what women are actually able to do and to be. That phrase is what Martha Nussbaum associates with the capability of approach, which is what you find in development ethics. So si Ma'am Amanda focused on phenomenology, this one is on development ethics. Alright, next slide please. So I encountered Martha Nussbaum in graduate studies in UP Diliman. I had to choose between two subjects to take because they were offered in the same time slot. At the time, I was already teaching ancient Greek philosophy, so I really would benefit from a course on reading the Greek text on Nicomachean ethics. But at the same time, inoffer sa parehong oras yung fragility of goodness ni Martha Nussbaum. So, of course, I was very frustrated because I only have to choose one. And that's offered by two very, very good professors in UP Diliman. In the end, I chose the Nicomachean ethics, but I made it my mission to read Martha Nussbaum in my free time, focusing on her work in emotions. Around that time too, I was already being encouraged by my professor and then colleague, Professor Julius Mendoza, to read Martha Nussbaum because of her expertise in Greek ethics. So, Professor Mendoza, he's here. I look up to him very much, and if he says you read it, I better do, of course. So that's what I did. Around that time too, sobrang famous na ng success ng libro ni Martha Nussbaum on Greek ethics, especially because during the 80s, we thought that mythologies and tragedies are just within the scope of arts and literature. But Martha Nussbaum successfully showed that the tragedies and the mythologies actually have a lot to say about questions about the good life, the meaning of life in ethics. So in the fragility of goodness, Martha Nussbaum defended that our search for or our pursuit of goodness or the good life can actually be easily wrecked or turned upside down by luck, by many things outside our control. And her word for that is the Greek word duke, which is luck. So what are these things that we cannot control? Of course, that includes lovers, the country that you live in, if you don't participate politically, etc., etc., and accidents in life in general, or just having a health condition you did not choose, etc., etc. So yun ang ginawa ko, binasa ko si Martha Nussbaum, and I made sure that the professor who is teaching Nussbaum in UP Diliman will become my thesis advisor, si Dr. Soksay. Hindi ko alam kung nandito siya ngayon. Next slide, please. So Martha Nussbaum is Ernst Freund Distinguished Professor of Philosophy and Law in the University of Chicago because of her, very prolific and wide-ranging works. Sobrang dami niyang appointments sa University of Chicago at sa maraming universities. She's appointed in the Classics Department. She's also appointed in the Divinity School, in the Law School, in the Philosophy Department, in Gender Studies, in Southern Asian Studies, and many more. So kung gusto niyo makilala si Martha Nussbaum further, meron siyang profile sa New Yorker. She was dubbed there as the philosopher of feelings because the profile focused on her work on emotions. But she would tell you in other fora that if you want a more accurate profile of her, please read her interview with eminent philosopher of emotion Andreas Grandino in 2017. You will find that in the newsletter, Emotion Researcher, ang title ay On Anger, Disgust, and Love. Alright, Martha Nussbaum, despite her success in the academe, also encountered so many challenges, of course. She speaks about her own experiences of harassment in terms of hiring, in terms of her tenure in Brown University in this particular article, which you find in the collection edited by Linda Martin Alcoff, Singing in the Fire. She talks about Don't Smile Too So Much, Philosophy and Women in the 1970s, where she centers on the behavior or the tendency of women to smile so much in order to exhibit polite behavior, in order to make things a little bit more easy to navigate, but actually becomes the site of their own oppression. Next slide, please. So ito yung picture na pinakita niya noong mga panahong yun when she wrote that article. Nussbaum in the 1970s. Okay. So as I said a while ago, maraming works si Nussbaum sa emotions, sa Greek philosophy, sa Hellenistic philosophy, sa law, public life, defense of the humanities, etc. Pero ang focus ko lang ngayon ay development ethics. And the best I can do is to introduce to you to the field of development ethics and what Nussbaum tried to do there. So some of the questions we encounter in development ethics are, what are the fundamental functions of a human life? Ano ba yung functions ng isang human life? Paano ma-achieve yun ng isang developing country? In what direction and by what means should a society develop? Saang direksyon? Sino ang magtatakda ng direksyon ng isang developing country? What should count as development? Or good development? Is development necessarily good? That's also a question that we should raise about our own country, of course. What basic goals should a society pursue and what principles should inform their selection? Who should be sitting in the deliberation table? Finally, what moral issues emerge in development policy making and practice, and how should they be resolved? Sino dapat ang kasama sa mga mag-resolve ng problems on development planning and policy? How should the burdens and benefits of development be conceived and distributed? Finally, what are the most serious local, national, and international impediments to and opportunities for good development? So may mga sagot si Martha Nussbaum sa mga tanong na yan on development ethics. And it's a long answer that she gave us. She started thinking about these questions and articulating them in her 2000 book, Women and Human Development. And then she updated that view in Capabilities and Social Justice. That's an article in for the International Relations, a review in 2002. Tapos, she also updated again the view in 2007, but this time with a view on people with disabilities and women. And then 2013 is the more general articulation of the capabilities approach. You will find that in Creating Capabilities, the Human Development Approach. Okay, so I'll focus on the article, the 2002 article, Capabilities and Social Justice. Why do I focus on this article and not on the books or the most recent one? It's because this is the article where she summarizes the whole approach. And that's where she will introduce you to the broad strokes of the arguments of the capabilities approach. And that's one of the instructions of this talk, of course. If I'm going to introduce you to her works, what would be the first thing you can read? Kung gusto niyo lang mas malawakang outline ng kanyang ginagawa sa capabilities approach, magandang magsimula sa capabilities and social justice. Okay. Sige, so this is the outline of the article. Very short lang, 5 sections. I think it's just under 15 pages yung kanyang summary. So, when did Martha Nussbaum start working on the capabilities approach or development ethics? She started working on these during her stint in the United Nations University. She served as an advisor for the World Institute for Development Ethics Research as a philosopher who co-worked or co-developed capabilities approach with the eminent economist and philosopher Amartya Sen. Around that time too, she started having an interest in the plight of poor women in India. So from 1986 hanggang 2013, she's working on it. Eventually, she branched out to other topics on ethics, but she maintained her interest in India and women in general. Okay, so based on her work for the UN as a philosopher, a moral philosopher more specifically, these are the conditions that she was faced with, not only in theory, but more primarily in practice, kasi she had to go to the field, of course. She had to spend so many years in India. And she's a contributor to these reports, and these are also the motivations for her to keep working on this problem. So, according to the Human Development Reports 1993 to 2000 of the UNDP, these are the plight of women, and these are the motivations behind Nussbaum's research on development ethics. Quote, page 126, there's no country that treats women as well as its men in areas ranging from basic health and nutrition, participation, and economic activity. Based on the reports, what does that mean? That women in much of the world lack support for fundamental functions of a human life. More specifically, anong ibig sabihin nun according to, More specifically, anong ibig sabihin nun para sa UN work on development work, next slide please. More specifically, it means women are less well-nourished than men, less healthy, more vulnerable to physical and sexual abuse. They are much less likely to be literate and have pre-professional or technical education. Next slide, please. In the workplace, if ever they will venture into the workplace, they face greater obstacles, including intimidation from family or spouse, sex discrimination in hiring, and sexual harassment in the workplace. In many nations, women are not full equals under the law. They do not have the same property rights as men, the same rights to make a contract, same rights of association, mobility, and religious liberty. What's good is that in recent years we have made progress. The latest that I checked is the 2019 Human Development Report, and we're making a lot of progress in many countries. I think the leading country there now is Germany and New Zealand, as well as Hong Kong, Japan, and Australia. So maraming naka-index yung lahat ng bansa, pwede yung i-check yung mga reports kung paano na tayo nag-progress. The thing is that I showed you this because these are also the sections that, again, Martha Nussbaum cites when she talks about the motivation behind doing so much work in development ethics. Okay, so let's talk about the approach that she co-developed with Amartya Sen. Eventually, she developed her own outside of her revisions of Amartya Sen's capability approach. Ano ang aim ng capability approach? It's to provide the philosophical underpinning for an account of basic constitutional principles that should be respected and implemented by the governments of all nations as bare minimum of what respect for human dignity requires. Okay, so many things to consider then. Around the 60s, 80s, development ethics as a field was already becoming more aware that they need moral philosophers because development needs moral assessment. At the same time, around that time, many philosophers, especially in practical ethics, are becoming more aware too that they need input from social scientists in terms of expanding the debate in ethics of aid and ethics of famine. So, doon papasok si Nussbaum. Around that time, nag-employ ng UN, nagtatawag na rin ng UN ng mga moral philosophers para tulungan sila sa pag-iisip kung paano ba natin i-shape ang development, i-define ang development. Okay, so ano ang capabilities approach? Basic constitutional principles, it's after that. All of these basic constitutional principles should be respected by all governments, regardless of anything. So it's a bare minimum. Countries can add, but all of these things must be respected. That's the argument of the capabilities approach. And the core idea, later on I will discuss, is human dignity from Aristotle's moral philosophy. Next slide, please. In other words, it's a philosophical take on the measurement of the quality of life. So marami tayong naririnig ngayon about work-life balance, about idea of play and laughter, how do we measure that, sino ang happiest country in the world. Marami doon is largely thanks to the accomplishments of capabilities approach and of course other approaches in development ethics. Okay, it's based on a universalist account of central human functions. In fact, this part of the capabilities approach made up of the bulk of Nussbaum's defense of the approach, because of course when you come up with a list to promote and to tell governments to follow, you better make sure you're not imposing. So Martha Nussbaum is trying to come to terms with that idea. If you come up with a list, how is it possible that we don't impose a solid, single, right, one conception of human life that people should live wherever they are? So it's a close ally of political liberalism to that extent. And by political liberalism, she means here John Rawls. in brief, since I don't have time. So if you're studying pol sci and you read political liberalism, sorry po sa mga pol sci friends ko dito, Ma'am Karin can explain it later. So the aim of political liberalism, at least insofar as Rawls is concerned, is to come up with an overlapping consensus, to locate an overlapping consensus where a pluralistic society can agree. So in this case, ang argument ni Martha Nussbaum at ni Amartya Sen ay itong listahan ng mga values na to na i-respect ng lahat ng gobyerno sa buong mundo ay alay ng political liberalism. Hindi tayo mag-i-impose, pero at the same time, ipapakita natin kung gaano sila kahalaga in terms of coming up with an overlapping consensus that all nations can agree on. Okay. So prior to that, prior to the capabilities approach, paano natin mini-measure ang quality of life? Especially prior to the works of Amartya Sen around the 80s, 70s, 80s, it's through gross national product per capita. So of course, that's very easy to do. You only have to produce the industries to be able to measure your GNP. The problem with that, of course, it's very limited and narrow. You don't get to show, for instance, through the GNP, how much of your population is enjoying religious freedom, how much of your women are experiencing good work conditions, how much of people with disability have the opportunity to work. Hindi naman kaya yun i-capture. So Amartya Sen and many other economists and development theorists thought about those questions. How can we come up with approaches that will capture better our ideas of quality of life beyond GNP? So doon papasok ang capabilities approach ni Martha Nussbaum. The capabilities approach asks, how satisfied is this woman, as a reference to satisfaction or preference-based approaches. It's not a question of how satisfied they are, because ang criticism ni Martha Nussbaum sa preference-based approaches sa development ethics ay, of course, preference or desires are sometimes politically shaped, if not shaped by the market. And when you prefer preference-based approaches, you preclude the question on whether they even have a choice to have those very desires. Yun ang criticism ni Martha Nussbaum. Or resource-based preferences. How much in the way of resources is she able to command? Of course, we are very much limited on the resources that we have. That also precludes important questions such as, kahit na merong resources na ganito ang iba't ibang sectors ng population, women, people with disability, do they get to have good social mobility? Kaya ba nilang mag-improve sa kanilang income, etc., etc.? Not those questions, but rather, what is she actually able to do and to be? What is the woman actually able to do and to be, especially from her work on India? That's our question. So the core idea is the human being, not just women, sabi ni Martha Nussbaum, of course, as a dignified free being who shapes their own life, not being passively directed by others, not having a say in the way you will lead your own life. And in that sense, human abilities, sabi ni Martha Nussbaum, exert the moral claim that they should be developed, right? Your different sectors of the population don't just get to live basically, as in the sense of animalistic functioning. But what are their abilities, and are governments doing as much as they can to develop all of these abilities? Okay, so some clarification of terms lang. Next slide, please. Kung gusto nating mas maintindihan si Martha Nussbaum, some of these are just sa clarification of terms. Pwede nating basahin yung marami pa niyang sinulat para i-clarify ang kanyang mga points sa capabilities approach. What does she mean when she says, capabilities not functioning is the appropriate political goal? By functioning, Martha Nussbaum refers to states and activities constitutive of being a person. Being healthy, having a good job, being safe, being happy, having self-respect, being calm. Yung kaya mong kumain, kunwari. 3 beses isang araw, isang measure yun sa Pilipinas. Whereas, functioning versus capability. Capability is, next slide please, functioning, all of those things, plus opportunity freedom. Sometimes, capability is also a combination of functionings plus opportunity freedom. In other words, alternative combinations of functionings that are feasible for a person to achieve. So it's not simply a question of kumakain ka ba 3 beses sa isang araw, but rather, meron ka bang choice sa kinakain mo? Are your markets and your governments giving you the choice, the option? So ang isang maganda example na binigay ni Martha Nussbaum ay para i-differentiate ang functioning at capability. Think about the distinction between starving and fasting. Of course, some people fast as a form of religious expression. What's the difference between starving and fasting, especially in the context of developing countries? Maraming poor countries simply starve because walang makain, walang resources. But some people fast, and there's a choice whether or not you will fast. But you don't get a choice when you starve. So that's a huge difference between having the choice, having the opportunities to even make the choice. In other words, your dignity as a human being includes your autonomy to be able to have that choice and to do the choice yourself after being educated, because that's one of the list. So ito yung listahan ng capabilities na dinipensahan ni Martha Nussbaum. 10. Okay. So life, being able to live until old age, and to sustain good health until you grow old. Bodily health, of course, that you are protected, you have insurance, even that you can live a healthy lifestyle. Bodily integrity, that you can move around in your country or wherever, being protected from assault or discrimination or whatever. Senses, imagination, and thought, that you can exercise your own imagination and thinking about the things you want to do in life. Emotion, that you can express your emotions through the many activities that you choose to do. Practical reason, the fact that you can decide your own ethical projects in your pursuit of a moral life. Affiliation, of course, refers to your freedom to affiliate to whatever group you want, especially in terms of religious freedom para sa India. Other species that we are able to enjoy, nature, that we are able to allow species to grow around us, and not harm others. Play and laughter, of course, and control over one's environment, to choose your own political party, for instance, is an example to that. Okay, some of the other defenses that Martha Nussbaum gives is not found in this article, it's found in the other books that I showed earlier. But just to invite you to read further her work, not just on development ethics, I'm going to go through her other books, and she has a lot. I think she has 1,000 articles and counting, and less than 100 books. So, The Fragility of Goodness, her work on tragedies and ethics. The Therapy of Desire, her work on Hellenistic ethics, so nakompleto niya, no, from the time of Homer hanggang the time of the skeptics. Cultivating Humanity, that's her defense of liberal education in the US. Not for Profit, her defense of why democracy needs the humanities. So makikita niyo dito kung gaano kadaming sinulat ni Nussbaum on so many topics. Next, Poetic Justice, so her thoughts about the public life, and of course the law, and how the law inscribes so many emotions such as disgust and shame. Next, please, Citadels of Pride, her philosophical thoughts about sexual assault and how we can confront them, especially in the academe. Aging Thoughtfully, her philosophical thoughts about retirement and wrinkles. Okay, her book on upheavals of thought, that's where she defends her own theory, her cognitive theory of the emotions. After working on her own theory on the emotions, she branched out to individual emotions. In this case, love and justice, political emotions. Next, anger and forgiveness. After Non-Monarchy of Fear, her own thoughts about the election of Trump. After that, last year lang, the Cosmopolitan Tradition, her thoughts on political liberalism. And then finally, Justice for Animals, our responsibility towards animals. I hope you can enjoy her works as much as I did, and I'm still doing. Thank you.